Good morning, everyone. Welcome to CSPC 2020, session 616, the transformative potential of international interdisciplinary research for responsible AI, a Canada-UK collaboration. The session is co-hosted and organized by SSHRC and UKRI. My name is Sean Marshall. I'm a CSPC 2020 program volunteer. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here virtually this morning. Before we begin, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Please remain muted through the session. The chat box is open for comments and to pose your questions, and we'll get to as many of these as we can through the session. Please also note that the session will be recorded. And finally, in the chat box, I will be adding links for a short survey that should take 1 or 2 minutes that you can fill out during the session or after, but please do fill that out to help CSPC improve for future years, especially with this new, as we learn to navigate this new online format. And without further ado, I'm going to now have the honor to pass things over to Brent Herbert-Copley of SSHRC and Paul Nightingale of UKRI, who will be the moderators for this session.
Thanks very much, Sean. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à vous tous et toutes. And welcome. First of all, let me thank CSPC for organizing this event. We're pleased to be part of it. And thanks to you, our audience. I'm keenly aware of the fact that you have lots of options at a conference like this, and maybe even more so now that we're meeting virtually. So our task over the next 90 minutes is to convince you that you've made a very wise choice this morning. That getting up and logging on to this particular Zoom chat at 8:30 in the morning is the absolute best choice you could have made in terms of how to spend your time today. My name is Brent Herbert-Copley. I'm Executive Vice President at SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And it's really my pleasure to be co-moderating this session along with my colleague Paul Nightingale from UKRI. Our session, as Sean has mentioned, is going to focus on the tremendous power of artificial intelligence. And more specifically, what we're going to hear about are 2 examples of international and interdisciplinary collaboration, which are focused not simply on avoiding or minimizing some of the potential negative impacts of AI, but really of harnessing artificial intelligence to maximize benefits to society and to tackle some particularly pernicious societal challenges. The 2 projects deal on the one hand with how we can help to tackle abusive language online. And in the second project example, how AI can help in terms of reducing bias in labor market decision-making, in recruiting, in professional networking, in advertising. These 2 projects are in turn part of a larger collaboration that involves the 3 main Canadian granting agencies, SSHRC, the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, along with our colleagues at the UK Research and Innovation and 4 of the constituent research councils that make up UKRI. In all, we're funding a series of 10 very innovative projects, and each of those involves tight collaboration between a team of researchers in the UK and in Canada, but equally importantly involves some very fascinating collaborations across wide-ranging disciplines. This morning, you're going to hear from people in computer science and mathematics, in business, in sociology, in media studies, and that's only a sampling of the kinds of disciplines that are involved in the full 10 projects. Our discussion, as I've said, is going to focus on some of the emerging lessons from these projects about the potential of AI, but also about some of the opportunities and challenges in terms of research collaboration across disciplines and across geographies. Let me take a couple of minutes to introduce our Canadian participants, and then I'm going to pass to Paul to make some opening remarks and introduce the UK participants. So our 3 Canadian experts this morning are first Linglong Kyong. Dr. Kyong is an associate professor at the Department of Mathematical and Statistical Sciences at the University of Alberta, and also Canada Research Chair in Statistical Learning. His research interests include statistical machine learning, high-dimensional data analysis, neuroimaging data analysis, robust statistics, and quantile regression. Also from the University of Alberta, Nicole Denier is an assistant professor of sociology, specializing in work, economy, and society. And Nicole's work looks at the structure and operation of the labor market, both as an engine and a site of social transformation. She's particularly interested in the interaction between social and economic inequality. And finally, Wendy Kyong Chun. Wendy is Canada 150 Research Chair in New Media at Simon Fraser University and leads the Digital Democracies group there. That group aims to integrate research across the humanities and the data sciences to address questions of equality and justice in order to combat the proliferation of online echo chambers of abusive language, discriminatory algorithms, and mis and disinformation. So I think we've got a wonderful set of experts, and let me now pass to Paul to make some opening remarks as well. Paul.
Thank you very much, Brent. So I'm Paul Nightingale. I am a director at UKRI. I work for the Economic and Social Research Council there, and we're very pleased to be involved in this. This is a fantastic collaboration. It emerged out of a workshop in 2018 where Canadian and UK science policy experts came together to think about the future of this subject area and realized there was a shared interest in responsible AI and a need for both countries which shared a similar situation economically and scientifically in relation to AI of not being the US or China, but also having a big interest in this area. And recognize there's a need to collaborate to ensure that the work we do supports innovation in AI and research in AI that takes into account of its enormous power to ensure that we work collectively to make sure that the social distribution of the benefits and the risks of AI are properly governed. And a key part of that we found was a shared agreement to be thinking early on about responsibility and about social impact of these technologies and a need to work together. And this is a technology that's distributed around the world. It will be subject to standards. There'll be negotiations about how we will govern this technology. So building those early collaborations to ensure that we have a shared understanding and a shared framework really provides a vital platform for thinking about interdisciplinary collaborations into the future for research, for governance, and for development, and also building those skills, those kind of there's a big skill to international collaboration that we're very, very keen to see so beautifully supported here. So I'm going to introduce our academics from the UK. So firstly, we have Kalina Bontcheva, who's from the Computer Science Department at the University of Sheffield, and she's an expert in NLP. She is working on the BIAS project, which is responsible AI for labour markets equality. And then we have from the responsible AI for inclusive democratic societies, Professor Monideepa Tarafdar, who is from the management science department at Lancaster, where she has a wide research stream looking at AI, the impact of IT on society and social media, and also a kind of an ops management capability, looking at how technology can change supply chains. And then we have Jabir Alani, and he is also from the management school at Lancaster, and he's a technical expert who's got significant expertise in NLP and text analysis. Okay, so having done the introductions, we will move swiftly on to the first set of questions, which I will lead off on. And I would like to start off by asking Monideepa and Kalina, if you could articulate for the audience, please, kind of what insights and observations can you share about this collaborative partnership to date? And then in doing that, if you could say a few words about your research projects and how you've made progress advancing responsible AI, and share some of the results you have, which will be of interest for the policy community. So if I could ask Monideepa to start off, please.
Thank you. Just a quick correction. I am in the BIAS project, and so is Jabir from the UK. And you just flipped the two projects, which is okay. That's fine, not a problem. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to just go through a brief presentation about our project. And just bear with me while Is that visible to everybody, my screen? If you can just raise your thumbs, I'll be, yeah, thank you. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll give a brief overview of what we are doing here and try to walk you through some of the things we've done so far and our approach to AI and particularly our approach to bias. and how it affects, and its manifestations in the labor market and the pathways through which it goes. So the goals. So what we want to do is to understand a dual role of AI. So the current thinking goes that AI is really rubbish because it brings out biases, creates biases and things like that. So what we are looking at is the role of algorithms in shaping gender and ethnic inequalities. We're looking at two sorts of inequalities in the labor markets. Why? Because labor markets are increasingly digitized. And what we are doing there is to look at a dual role of AI. The first is to use AI to understand gender and ethnic biases in AI-driven processes. And we start from the job recruitment processes in companies because we believe that that is the one that ultimately leads to labor market inequalities. So a two-level study. The first level is looking at the company, what happens in the recruitment processes, how does bias play a role there, and then how does that shape into biases in the labor market, larger labor market, the macro level. So using AI to understand those biases, and then the next step would be to develop responsible AI that mitigates those biases and attendant qualities by designing algorithms which are bias aware, or algorithms and development protocols which are bias aware. Now, as you can see, if it's a two-level process like this, then we have to have a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary team of researchers. So Linglong and Nicole and Jabir, we are representing our team from the UK and Canada. And we have competencies across information systems, management, mathematical and computational sciences, and the sociological sciences. And we also adopt a multi-method approach where we look at natural language processing, we look at qualitative analysis, we look at literature review, and we also look at statistical and computational analysis. So this is our team. At Lancaster, there are 4 of us, and Jabir and I are representing the team at Lancaster. We also have our partner university, and the other partner university in the UK is Essex, Hong Sheng and Burrold and Shengang, they're not here. And Alberta has a number of people, and we have Linglong and Nicole representing us from there. As you will see, we have a number of early career academics. That was one of the things in the call. So we have PhDs and we have postdoc researchers. Not everybody is on this list because we still have people coming in through the pipeline over the next 3 years. So our approach is an interdisciplinary research design, and we have, as I said, a number of disciplines represented in our project. And we have a multi-stage project where we look at what's happening in job advertising, in hiring and socialization, company level. The next level is to look at how does that translate into labor market biases with respect to gender and ethnicity at the societal level, at the macroeconomic level. Mixed methods, data text mining, algorithmic review, optimization, and algorithm development, qualitative analysis, focus groups, and ethnography. So, and secondary data analysis as well. So that's our kind of approach. And we look at bias and in 3 columns. If you look at the first, I'll start from the right-hand side, or I'll start in the middle. Okay, so that's the mathematics and statistics column, where we say, okay, bias is about, in data collection, it's in, in the modeling process, it's in terms of co-founders, confounders, and things like that. So that's your statistical and mathematical computational approach to bias. The second approach to bias, if we look at the right-hand side, is the light blue column. And that approach is about the company. So it's about organizations, it's about their processes, in this case, recruitment processes, resume processing processes, socialization processes. So how do these HR, so we're focusing on HR processes, how do these HR processes, what bias exists there and how can that be looked at? And on the right-hand side, left-hand side, so we go from the right to the left. Once we understand what biases are there in the organization, we can then go and say, okay, if we have all these organizations with so much of bias, it's bound to be seen at the level of the society, at the level of the labor market. And that's our sociological approach to bias, which is social categorization, preferences, and processes. And that's where our sociologists are looking at that, right? So then our general research questions are, is AI fundamentally, is AI a fundamental cause for bias? Can we use AI to tackle bias, make it better instead of just identifying it? How do policymakers and practitioners view the AI labor market processes? And are there ways to mitigate bias? And then finally, because it's UK, Canada, it's a cross-country project, we also look at some comparisons. Okay. I won't go through the whole diagram, but this is kind of our plan, and it's a 3-year plan. And the leftmost column is year 1, the middle column is year 2, and the last column is year 3. And we have 2 work packages along the top and the bottom running parallel to one another. The first work package on the top focuses on the processes at the organizational level. That's the social process. And the second work package at the bottom is a technical work package. It focuses on the algorithms and the techniques. So as you can see, it's a socio-technical approach. It's a 360 approach to bias, and the 2 work packages have various pathways to talk to one another. And I'm happy to answer questions about this at a later point, but I'm just... Okay, what have we done so far? So we've looked at, so we're looking at the year 1 deliverables. As we all know, this has been a very special year. And all of us have gone through lots of different changes and disruptions and things like that. So our focus has been very tightly on the first year variables, year 1 deliverables. And really our year 1 deliverables were about analysis of secondary data. We are looking at text mining of job advertisements on digital platforms across Canada and UK. So what we're looking at is we're getting data on job advertisement platforms, like, give an example. I'm not saying we are going to get data necessarily from them. I can't say that here. But for example, jobs.ac.uk or monster.com. These are platforms which host job advertisements. And what we're looking at is the text of that advertisement and trying to mine that and see, are there gendered, is there gendered language? Is there language that that could possibly discriminate on the basis of ethnicity and things like that? So this is what we've done in the first year. We've also hired a number of early career researchers in our project, both in Canada and in the UK. In the UK, mainly research associates. In Canada, we have PhD students and research associates. We've also have now, an ongoing additions to our advisory board, which consists of both companies and individuals across industry and academia. And we have universities such as Rutgers and Waterloo and McGill represented, and we have companies such as Reed UK, which is one of UK's leading, job posting companies. Profusion is a developer. Arctic Shows is a company that makes the software that screens resumes. So we have, advisory boards. So on the whole, we have I think we've made, good progress given the circumstances. And we are right now in the process of, what we've done so far is to develop some, bias detection algorithms or modify them and do a literature survey of what is out there. And we've selected a few, and now we are in the process of applying those algorithms to external data, which we have sourced from some of these platforms. So I will stop here and I will stop sharing the screen, and I will hand it over to the next speaker, but I'm here happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was extremely clear. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Professor Bontcheva. So if you could provide a few insights about your projects, how much progress you've made towards advancing responsible AI, and any insights and observations that you can share from the partnership to date. So, Professor Bontcheva.
Thank you. Yes, our project, as introduced already, is looking at cross-disciplinary methods to detecting and countering online abuse. And the reason why we chose that specific topic, and we think it's really, really important, is because this kind of toxic and abusive language online threatens the integrity of the public dialogue. So a lot of the dialogue around democracy and elections, for example, is taking place online. And in that sort of space, we have just witnessed the US presidential elections and the sort of role that slightly, toxic behavior and toxic discussions are having very polarized effects on the citizens. Some of them can be led to apathy as a result. It also plays an important role in terrorism and radicalization, as well as cyberbullying. So it's really, really important to have a robust approach to detecting and countering this type of behavior. And of course, understandably, governments worldwide have put legislative responses in place that are basically trying to limit this type of behavior and introduce legal obligations to the platforms to moderate this type of content, for example, detection, evaluation, deletion, removal, banning of the users, and so on. And then it also needs to be done very timely, so within like 24 or 48 hours of publication in order to limit its negative impact. At the same time, we have a number of social media companies that have adopted very stringent terms and conditions against this type of behavior. However, the challenge still remains. Despite all of these efforts, this type of behavior continues online and is, in a way, you could also say there is a rising surge of that as well. So in terms of moderation, it's really difficult to do that effectively at present. So we're lacking both the a viable human approach as well as a viable technological approach. So we have, for example, in the human case, where we have human moderators like those employed by Facebook, for example, this is very costly. So often it's outsourced to sometimes other countries or external contractors and so on. But it's also very harmful to the people who actually are doing that job. And sometimes they are also lacking in cultural understanding, linguistic understanding, to fully appreciate and understand that for different types of, say, ethnic minorities, maybe some different types of content are abusive. And so there are issues also of moderation bias as a result. But also the biggest problem of human moderation is scale. So we have a lot of content being posted every second online on a lot of platforms, and this is not possible to be effectively moderated by humans. Therefore, unsurprisingly, many of the companies like Facebook and Twitter and others have turned to AI solutions for content moderation. They're developing, Google as well, are developing a lot of algorithms for recognizing online toxic content and toxic behavior and trying to moderate this in an automatic fashion. However, this raises a lot of other issues. For example, it's a question of there is no transparency, so it's not clear what are the algorithms that are being used by these companies. Are they biased towards certain social groups, for example, or not? Can we be sure that what has been removed has really been toxic, as opposed to, some false negatives being in there, false positives rather. Then it has a negative impact on privacy very often and freedom of expression, because there is some inherent bias in the algorithms. And of course, them being algorithms, they're not 100% correct. So this is a real challenge, and this is why there is a need for better development of better, less biased AI solutions, and also looking at how they can be integrated and used effectively in the whole process of detection and countering online abusive behavior. So we have also cases where, because of this lack of transparency and sort of scale and consistency of moderation, sometimes we have this also politicization of the issue. We've just witnessed that in the US election again, where some parts, say strongly right-wing citizens and parties are blaming some companies to have a left-wing bias, whereas very strongly left-wing parties are likewise, or citizens are likewise blaming them for having a right-wing bias. And the upshot of this, for example, has been that because Facebook was considered to be overly moderated and to have anti-right-wing bias, many of these supporters of President Trump has now turned towards Parler, which is even less moderated, and is something, again, that we need to study. So what this is demonstrating are the big challenges of this type of research. It's basically a situation where the goalposts are continuously moving, in the sense that people are moving from one platform to the other. The way they're engaging in online behavior is also changing. And therefore, it's very, very important to have an in-depth understanding of these phenomena, and also try to develop AI algorithms which are more fair and free of bias. So we have focused on two constituencies, as you might have guessed from the examples I was giving. One is politicians and the other one is gamers. I think it's very clear why politicians, and in the case of gamers and gaming spaces, they often act as sort of recruitment sites for extreme political views, and can be linked to offline violent attacks. So this is something that makes it really important to do this research and be aware of the problems there. So on the Sheffield side, our team has a background in AI and natural language processing. So we've worked in the past 6 months on questions like, can we quantify the bias that's embedded within the current content moderation algorithms? How can we understand, are they discriminating against on the basis of identity, like gender, ethnicity, and political affiliation, for example? And these are all really important questions. In terms of challenges and issues we had to solve, we've also had to invest very heavily in the problem of data collection, because each of these social platforms have their own ways of accessing the data, or limiting the ways to access the data. That has meant that, it's a significant effort to actually put together data from Twitter, Reddit, gaming platforms like Twitch, Parler, 4chan and 8chan, these kinds of spaces that are sort of originators of this type of behavior before it spills over in the mainstream, like Facebook and Twitter. So this is really important to understand. And we have been collaborating very actively with Wendy's team in Canada, who are social scientists, and they are working on understanding and exploring the implications and the applications of these AI algorithms in the context of democratic counter-speech, and also community care and response, and also in the gaming. So I'd like now to pass very briefly to Wendy as well to add her perspective on the work. Thank you.
Great. So thanks, Kalina, and hello, everyone. So as Kalina has explained, our fundamental question is, how can AI be better deployed to foster democracy? So how can we integrate freedom of expression, human rights, and multicultural participation in the protection of abuse? So to be clear, our project starts from the key observation that freedom of expression, human rights, and multicultural participation aren't opposed. So when people usually talk about abusive language, they usually assume that some people have to give up free speech in order to protect others. But in reality, it's not so clear, because it's often the same group that's targeted. So LGBTQ AIDS activists were one of the first groups to be censored, and they're also the targets of hate speech. This is also true for people who use Black English, and activists who address racism online are routinely banned from social media platforms. So there are many examples of counter speech being shut down. And this is important because counter speech is crucial to democracy. It's through counter speech that democracy becomes more inclusive. Now, the current problem is that human and automatic moderation techniques extract words and cases from context. So to develop a more comprehensive approach, we've started to produce an anatomy of counterspeech using machine language as one of the many tools in order to understand and deploy context. So we're analyzing not just language, but also networks and communities and histories of speakers, platforms and economic incentives, historical and institutional context, as well as the importance of performance and interaction. Now, a lot of the criticism directed at AI has been focused on predictive machine learning programs and their use in law enforcement and risk assessment and in policy. The classic example is COMPAS. It's a program used by some US courts to determine the risk of recidivism. And this has been sued as being biased against racial minorities. So for us, responsible AI isn't AI that relieves humans of responsibility, but rather AI that helps evidence-based reasoning, policy, and decisions. So machine learning that helps us make the hard decisions. So in this part of the project, we're using machine learning as a probe. We're analyzing historical examples to help determine the features of abusive language, counterspeech, and the networks of speakers within this larger anatomy of counterspeech. So we're using machine learning to determine hotspots that need to be further investigated. We're combining them with literary analysis to understand how language mutates. So part of the problem is that language changes all the time. And we also plan to develop machine learning tools to help those who are targeted with abusive language. So we're working with gamers who have been targeted with hate speech to understand what tools they and their communities want and need. And again, game sites are crucial, game sites as well as cases like Discord, because they've been shown to be sites of radicalization. In fact, they've become laboratories, people have argued, for polarization.
Okay, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I'll hand over to Brent to ask the second question.
Super, thanks very much. Yeah, and those are tremendously clear summaries of these very complex projects. I want to just mention to people who've joined us over the last few minutes, we've got our audience is growing a little bit. Paul and I are going to ask some questions of the panelists, but then we'll open it up to you to ask your questions. Feel free to use the chat function throughout the session in order to make your views known or pose your questions. But the second question I have, I'm going to pose to Nicole and to Wendy, is about the interdisciplinary nature of this project. And one of the goals of this initiative has been to fund interdisciplinary research that cuts across research domains where people don't maybe always work together. Could you tell us a little bit about your expectations of that collaboration going into the project and the experience you've had about bringing new perspectives and new methodologies together to produce concrete results? And Nicole, I'll turn to you for perhaps first.
Sure. So I'll say that I have a history, a bit of interdisciplinary research, but mainly with social demographers and economists. And I have a very ingrained sense of what working with an economist is like. So this project was new to me because it was truly bridging disciplines that I really don't have ongoing collaborations with and had very few expectations of their disciplinary perspectives or conversations that we might have. So I wanted to sort of share a story with you all today about what that looks like in practice and some of the challenges that we've had in bringing together our perspectives to create workable solutions and outputs. So in one of our first team meetings, we wrote short primers for one another of what thinking about bias looks like in our respective fields, right? We're uniting disciplinary perspectives from sociology and sociological bias in labor markets, statistical approaches on data and modeling, and perspectives on information systems. So combining our views really is bringing unique concerns, ways of thinking, and modes of analyzing data to the fore. And together we're trying to lay the foundations for human-computer integration and algorithm design for both practitioners and academics. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what each team sort of identified as central to the meaning of bias from their perspective. So the sociology team, which I'm a part of, identified bias within this broader tradition of studying intergroup dynamics, where people sort of rely on common social categories like gender and race to make sense of and structure the world. And these categories often inform conscious and unconscious preferences for interacting with people and ultimately come to inform organizational practices. Workplaces and hiring are important organizational contexts where we see this bias play out, like when certain groups are denied opportunities in terms of hiring, promotion, or treatment. The statistics team, on the other hand, focused on bias as a misrepresentation of some social phenomenon, resulting from poor data quality or collection that omits populations it should include. Similarly, modeling techniques may distort or omit important causal factors. So this perspective really turns our attention to the importance of both data collection and modeling in identifying biases or inequalities in outcomes between groups, and emphasizes links between theories of inequality and data collection and measurement in formulating effective interventions. The final approach, the Computing and Information Systems team or approach, highlighted ways to identify bias and fairness in system outputs. And they noted that developers tend to look at differences in a system's predictions or decisions with respect to predetermined privileged and underprivileged groups. And these typically relate to legally protected attributes like gender and racial identity. If the outputs for the underprivileged group are found to be unfavorable, the system is considered biased in ways that make it unfair. And different bias metrics like equal opportunity difference, statistical parity difference, and disparate impact highlight the absence of a consensus view on acceptable algorithmic outcomes, and that ideas of fairness are subjective. So they reflect people's different understandings of social contexts, their positions within it, and the preferences they're ultimately seeking to optimize. So this perspective emphasizes the importances of studying more granular technical processes, and simultaneously that these advanced technologies are extensions of social systems that align with logics already encoded in our relationships and institutions. So that's sort of the intellectual lineages that we're trying to integrate. I think practically speaking, what this means is that we need a lot of data and a lot of ongoing dialogue. So we're combining different understandings of the social, historical, and legal definitions of gender and race, which are the sources of bias that we're studying. And I want to highlight here that these vary not only across our disciplines, but also across countries. So understandings of race and ethnicity are profoundly different in Canada and the UK. We're also integrating levels of analysis and statistical and qualitative methodologies. So again, this is just an ongoing dialogue as we work towards building algorithms that really center human intervention at every stage in both design and through the system throughput as they're implemented.
Super. Thanks, Nicole. Wendy, can I turn to you?
Thank you. I have to say, so far it's been great. There's been some challenges related to COVID, and Kalina will talk about them later in response to another question. But I think that what's been key in terms of our collaboration is that we started this project together. So a lot of problems with interdisciplinary projects is they tried to add social science or ethics to technology as if it was some secret sauce that you could put on at the very end. And what's key is that it's not that there's no social science in technology, but it's often bad social science that's embedded in technology. And a key example of this is something like homophily. So almost all social networks assume that similarity breeds connection. This means that echo chambers aren't a mistake, they're the goal. And importantly, the term homophily comes itself from social science, but studies of white attitudes to biracial public housing within the US. So homophily is basically a legacy of US segregation. So again, echo chambers are a goal, not an error. Other projects try to solve social problems, use technology to try to solve social problems for us. And this inevitably does not end well. So Compass, the the risk assessment program we discussed earlier was actually introduced into US courts as a way to solve the problem of judges' discrimination. The internet was sold very early on as a way to solve racism. So in order for interdisciplinary problems to work, they have to be conceived together and they have to take on a problem that's important and that we can't solve on our own. Otherwise, you don't need to collaborate. In fact, collaboration's a waste of time. So we started with problems that were really central to both our research groups. And those were abusive language and discriminatory machine language. And we started with what appeared to be roadblocks, such as the censoring of counterspeech, the question of context and bias, as well as the question of scale that Kalina brought up. And like the other group, our first steps have been relaying our approaches to the problem of this problem to each other, building a common vocabulary and refining the problem. So really trying to focus on where collaboration is needed. And practically, we've each taken the lead on one part of the project. Kalina has focused on quantifying bias and exploring sentient context. We focused on historical context and counterspeech. And again, the concrete results so far have been this anatomy of counterspeech, which engages with NLP, but also places it within a larger historical context, and importantly, uses NLP and Kalina's work to build out the context as well. So we've been using machine learning techniques early on, as the others have, to diagnose the problem. And we've been trying to think through responsible and develop responsible AI as a form of probing AI to enable large-scale evidence-based research. And Kalina, is there something that you would like to add to this answer?
No, thank you, Wendy. That was everything. Thank you.
Super. Thank you, Wendy and Nicole. Let me turn it back to Paul, who I think is going to pose our next question to the panel. And again, let me encourage people in the audience to share your questions via the chat function.
Yeah, can I reiterate that if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat, and we will get to them. So I'd like to move on to the third question, which is very dear to my heart. I'm someone who trained as a chemist and has ended up being working for a social science research funder. So this is about the obstacles and difficulties you've had in working with researchers across multiple research domains. So what is a personal problem for me is an organizational problem for you. So I'd be very interested in your thoughts. So if I turn first to Jabir and then to Kalina.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. Really, actually, it is my first time to work in the this kind of international project and into multidisciplinary this kind of multidisciplinary projects. And actually, we started at the first by facing the one of the major difficulties. It was about the data collection and which one that we should go for, what are the resources. Actually, we studied, we made this study about the platforms, the main resources for data, for job ads, for both ends in UK and Canada. But actually, and we reached to a very, very good point actually to get using some using APIs or some tools that are provided by these platforms. But to decide which ones to go for, we have to balance it, and we have to just choose which one that to choose in both countries and which one to cover as well. And there was one of the difficulties that some of the job ads were in French, which is kind of the language was one of the things that we find a bit one of the difficulties in the Canadian end. But as a working environment, actually, at the beginning it was there were some shy meetings as a team at the beginning, but then as we worked forward, we start to share our materials. We share our concerns with transparency and and weekly sprint meetings. And actually we were very there was a very huge move forward as a working team, because after a couple of months we reached to a point that we can just pass on any kind of concerns, and we just we just started to do one-to-one meetings in a very short notice, based on the need for each for the project. We used actually, because of the COVID, which has reflected on our project, and because we are we should actually work remotely. So it was a kind of, the combined combined let's say impact on our progress. But it was actually eventually actually it was a very good opportunity to work remotely with people, with researchers from different domains. So one of the good things actually we learned actually from that every one of us were able to just make any kind of argument about or any concern about any problem that should be faced. For example, I remember that one of the things that Nicole just checked, that the difference between the bias and the dominant about the data. So which ones are these are the percentages that we could consider as a kind of dominant or the bias. So and then we have reflected these kind of opinions on our project. So this is why we just discuss every single thing with very transparency, and we pass on all of the technical all of the technical experience, and very in using the clouds, Google Cloud, Google Share slides, OneDrive clouds, and it was the meeting were scheduled. We have scheduled times, and the problem that we faced at the beginning is the time difference between Canada and UK. But we have after we find out how these things work out in both countries, actually we reached to a very nice agreement that we will have this kind of time window that will be mutual or very nice, or very comfortable for everyone to work on, in order just to mitigate the impact of the time difference between the two countries. Actually, I've learned a lot, and I think my colleagues as well. We are heading into a very nice point of getting to our goal into this project. I'm more than happy to share this experience, and maybe it will made a kind of impact on others to follow on this course. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And if I could ask Kalina.
Yes, thank you, Paul. Actually, we already discussed about the time zone challenge. I was going to mention that Vancouver is 8 hours behind us. So we often start our meetings at 5 p.m. our time in the UK. And of course, they also have a very early start. So that's been something. But yes, we found a slot that works for everybody. And with a bit of flexibility on both sides, it can be overcome. Electronic means of collaboration have also been helpful, as already noted. In terms of COVID, yes, that has had various implications. And in our case specifically, it's kind of been particularly challenging in the sense that it's not possible when you're working with social media data like tweets or similar content. It's against their terms of service to share that data with others, which basically means that the two teams have to actually independently collect the data and process that data independently of each other. So this is problematic. I mean, in the sense that say we have some very extensive Twitter data collections that go back 3 elections in the UK, all the way back to 2015. But normally we could share those if the Canadian researchers could come, for example, to the UK and work with us in Sheffield. Now, of course, this currently is not possible. So we kind of had to choose to work on problems that don't require somebody to come here to face that, to have this access to the data that otherwise we cannot share. That has been one practical impediment that we're hoping to overcome soon as the pandemic is coming, hopefully, to an end spring onwards. This also has GDPR implications because social media data, even though public data, is subject to GDPR. So there's been also those aspects to take into account, the ethics and so on. The more generic problem is that access to data is difficult. Because the toxic content tends to be moderated quickly and disappears quickly. So either the person who posted it will self-moderate and delete it, or the platform will delete it. So it means that basically it's not possible to study something in the past because you no longer have access to that data. So if a politician has said something controversial or abusive, that data is very likely gone unless you are collecting it at the time when they've said it. So this is something that is a particular challenge. And in general, I think a better approach will be, rather than the companies saying, oh, these are all the things you cannot do, would be if they were to actually give researchers privacy respecting and under various data sharing agreements, legally binding and so on, access to some of the data and the content that they actually are moderating, because then it will enable us to study these phenomena a lot better, rather than sort of trying to make do with whatever scraps there are left after they've moderated the content. For example, there's positive examples out there. So Twitter are sharing their election integrity data, and we can share. We have already signed data sharing agreements with them. We have full access to that de-anonymized data. We also have access to a lot of COVID-19 data, again, thanks to a Twitter data sharing agreement. So I think one aspect where governments and policymakers and also funders like yourselves can help will be to try and push forward that agenda with the companies towards transparencies and data sharing, and actually working with researchers and allowing independent research into these topics in a more effective and efficient and more thorough manner as well. So I think this is sort of the main obstacle. It's not an easy one to overcome, but fingers crossed there will be some positive developments also through ongoing discussions with the platforms that we're undertaking as and when we can. So yeah, the other challenge has been getting used to the different tools and methodologies that both sides are making use of, identifying efficient ways to make the results of our research here, for example, the new AI algorithms available to the Canadian researchers, so they can execute them there on the data, and vice versa. So yeah, but overall, I would say that it's been a very positive experience, one that we will definitely continue even after the end of this funding period, because we think that there's just a lot to be gained from having this multidisciplinary approach to the problem as a whole. So thank you.
Thank you, that's fantastic. Okay, I'll hand back to Brent.
Great, thanks, Paul. And one last question to me before we open it up for more general discussion. I want to talk a little bit about the Canada. We've already touched on it to a certain degree, but the Canada-UK element in this. Can we maybe talk about why that's important, what that international dimension has brought to your work? And if you have them, do you have any recommendations for funders like the organizations that Paul and I represent, about how to facilitate this kind of international collaboration in the future? And I'll maybe turn to Linglong and to Wendy to provide some initial comments on this, and then we can open up to others as well. Linglong.
Thank you, Brent. And I think Brent and Sean, my team members, and also the other team have briefly talked about this importance of this international and interdisciplinary collaboration. The one of the important thing is, like Sean mentioned, the similarity in terms of economic and science structure background in the two countries. So we can work together to benefit both countries. On the other hand, there are also difference in terms of its economic and social structure and everything between UK and Canada. So we can learn from each other, and there will certainly benefit our scientific benefit our research and advance our research. And in terms of the recommendation, I'm a statistician and AI researcher, and of course, this model, like responsive AI, I think so far it's very good. I project the future will also benefit both community, both country, multi-disciplinary community. So we probably want to continue this this model. And also I want to touch some other perspective of this AI. For example, this interpretability of this AI. This we want to develop this explanatory AI, and then how to do this multidisciplinary, like this model. How do we combine multidisciplinary researchers and advance this area? Another area about AI, I personally want to see is this stability, robustness, and replicable of this AI. How this could be, you know, in other areas like social science, economics, and business. How this could be applied. And a third area I want to see, maybe, you know, encourage this not only multidisciplinary, a different sector, for example, industry and academic, and how the academic can benefit the industry, how the industry can inspire this academic research. Like I said, you know, so far so good. I think this will benefit all of us a lot. And I think that's all for me.
Super. Thanks so much. Wendy, over to you.
Thanks. So first of all, keep funding them. This kind of interdisciplinary international collaboration is really key if we want to take on the challenges that face us and be competitive. And I know you talked about competition early in terms of US and China. And it's also key because we all know that predictive machine learning can be discriminatory. Again, we have high profile examples such as Compass and discriminatory hiring processes. But the question that we're all grappling with through these projects is, what can we do about it? And I want to stress that these kinds of projects are important because this cross-disciplinary work is already being taken up or acknowledged as sort of the bleeding edge of research, both within universities and within corporations. So before I moved to SFU for the Canada 150 chair, I was at Brown. And sometimes I think that university is like a bad version of Survivor, right? And so a new president came in, they said, okay, faculty, you all have to get together and come up with these projects. And so I was put together with the head of computer science, as well as someone who works in biostats, and we were supposed to come up with a big data initiative together. And we looked at each other and said, we're not going to work with each other unless there's a problem that you can't solve and I can't solve on our own. And we decided that that problem, and this came from the person in biostats who was working on AIDS research, was that if he could show that almost any correlation existed, if almost anything is real, what's true. And that became a rubric for us to think together. And importantly, technology companies are fostering interdisciplinary approaches to machine learning and digital media more generally. This is because technology companies are increasingly regulated as media companies, and they're reaching out because they're trying to understand what it means to be a media company. This kind of interdisciplinary work is also being understood as crucial to the future of technology. So Intel is a supporter of this work, and this is because increasingly they're understanding themselves as a game hardware company. And in order to survive, they've got to reach out to a larger population. So if there's a sense that game sites are sites of abusive language, it's not going to attract the wider population that they want. So this kind of investment is key to keeping Canadian and UK academia and companies in the lead. And in terms of recommendations, besides keep funding these kinds of initiatives, is to offer workshops so that more collaborations can develop organically. So to bring researchers together who are working on similar problems across different disciplines to understand how they can work together and where they can really make that difference in terms of what's being done internationally and interdisciplinarily. And I think, Kalina, you also had some things to add?
Yes, thank you, Wendy. So there's two aspects that I wanted to highlight in addition. So the first one is that studying online behavior, not just online abuse, but social media spaces in general, these type of spaces, they tend to evolve over time. And the demographics of the people that are engaged in those spaces also evolves over time. We know that Facebook, initially young people were on Facebook, but now they're not. So this is why it's very important, I think, to continue to have research programs that are continually bringing together social scientists, computer scientists, and other disciplines, of course, to study and understand how this behavior evolves over time and across media spaces, and how does it also jump from one platform to another. I think this is really important, and continued funding in that space is also important, because it doesn't look like this type of online interactions and engagement are likely to change in the near future beyond the next 3 to 4 years of this program. And then also there is another very important point, which is about the moderation and transparency. So the platforms and the social media companies, they are under legal obligation to monitor and moderate this type of content on their sites, but and they are doing it. But what we don't know is how well are they doing it, and in the process of them doing it, are they, to what degree they're infringing on some human rights for their users. So what I would say is that there is an urgent need to have independent research funded into monitoring and assessing the impacts of these different types of moderation methods and the different types of policies that are enforced by these different platforms and companies in terms of their impact on human rights, privacy, and other phenomena from their users' perspective. And also, how well do they, for example, implement the right of redress, the right of appeal, because many of them currently don't. So these are the only two other aspects that I wanted to highlight. Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks. Yeah, all of you are touching on things that I would love to probe a little bit more. Maybe one thing just before we turn to the chat, Wendy, you talked about workshops to allow these kinds of collaborations to develop organically. I mean, how did the Canada-UK links emerge in these two projects? Are you people who have been working together in the past, or is this a new collaboration? How is it evolved?
So ours actually evolved over time because we had a common student, Zirak Wasim, who was interested in bringing together social science perspectives to the work on abusive language. And so he had contacted me many years before, and we together came up with the first abusive language workshop for an NLP conference. And then when the call came out and we had started talking, it became clear that Kalina's work in NLP and our work on discrimination and abusive language and counterspeech really could speak together. So we had that in common, and I think that was key to making this collaboration work.
Yeah, maybe Jabir or Monideepa or Nicole want to talk to that same question, but I'm always struck by how many of the big international collaborations have their roots in one PhD student or one postdoc. It's really quite astounding.
Yeah, in our case, I think we have a huge team, as you've seen, and some of us have worked with some others before. And those people got together with the kernel. And then, for example, I knew the people in Lancaster, but I didn't know anybody in Alberta or Essex. And people in Alberta probably knew one another from previous projects. And I think there was one link between Alberta and Essex, which kind of started it off. So it's like any social network, it starts from one node and one link, I guess. But I think the other thing is that the larger issue here is, if you're putting together a big team like this, it's nice to know that 2 or 3 people have worked with one another, but 10 people, 15 people have not worked with one another. And that's always going to be like that because you're going to have an interdisciplinary team. And I think the important thing there, in our case, what worked, and I think Jabir referred to that, Nicole also to some extent, is that, very quickly we realized that we needed to catch up on each other's disciplines, on each other's ways of thinking. And so we made it a point to meet as a team regularly. And this is one of the rare cases where all of us feel that meetings actually help. And this is one of the rare cases where we feel like, we want to meet. In our case, it's every month, but that's not a formula. I think the idea, the intention should be to keep meeting in the sense of sharing things, sharing vocabulary, sharing problems, and sharing, just frankly talking. I mean, Jabir said he can talk. The other thing I wanted to just mention, which I didn't want to mention because everybody else was talking, one good thing that Manija told me, and I really appreciate that, she said that we want early career people to take part in this meeting. So, Linglong and I are not early career. Nicole is an assistant professor, so kind of early career. Jabir is very early career. This is his first post-PhD job. And here he is talking about interdisciplinary collaboration, for God's sake. That's a huge deal. Most of us don't get to interdisciplinary till we make tenure. And here he is in his very first job. He's saying, this is what we've done to understand each other. And so the idea that Manija gave that, we should have, at least to the UK people, that we should have early career people in this meeting. I really like that. And I'm glad that at least 2 of our early career people could make this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Should we go on and take some of the questions from the chat? If I can take a bit of privilege as a moderator and jump one, I'll come back to Francois's one, I promise, but one that's really of particular interest to me from a funding perspective is Carol Ann's question, which is the additionality of this. So what part of the formalization of this Canada-UK partnership has helped to advance AI research compared to had we not done it at all? So how is the world different as a consequence of there being a partnership in this area over and above what you would have done anyway? Who would like to answer that?
Can I take a first stab at it? And now
sure, thank you.
Talk about it. I can't speak to the formalization or non-formalization of the agreement, but I do want to say that for our project, tackling labor market inequality and new algorithmic forms of inequality is a pressing need in both societies. So having a coordinated response to the development of human-centered AI design is absolutely crucial, right? It's not an innovation to come up with new forms of discrimination that skirt old regulations, okay? So coming up with AI that builds on an equitable future is going to be hugely beneficial to both societies. So that's going to advance AI, and it's going to lead a conversation across other societies, right? So without that, we're just having social scientists siloed off, AI developers siloed off, regulatory bodies siloed off across countries. And so I think the formalization of this agreement is really about building AI futures that respect the progress of the past and carry that into the future. So that's my perspective on this, and I'd love to hear what the other teams or researchers think.
Thank you. Anyone else like to come in on that?
If I may, I'd like to make a complementary point, which is that, we spent since 2017 studying online abuse stories, UK MPs, but it's been really insightful to be able to look at how this type of interactions happen in Canada, because it's a different, even though it's the same language, you would say, the context is very different, the culture is very different, the issues are very different. So it's been really something that allowed us to make comparisons and make studies across the countries and across the cultures, which otherwise would have not happened.
Okay, anyone else from the teams want to come in on what the additionality is here?
So here, I think what we are seeing now is huge abilities to analyze data. And so a lot of the cutting edge science today is built on huge data sets. And just to be able to make sure that those data sets are analyzed in very coherent ways, I think it's important to have inter-country partnerships. And for instance, in our case, we are trying to figure out the same data sets from the two countries as far as, this would never have happened if we weren't an inter-country. We would just be thinking UK. And yeah, we can't have all countries, and the UK and Canada are, so the thing about UK, Canada is, on the one hand, it's pretty similar. So we're not comparing apples and oranges in every which way. There's some apples and oranges kind of a view, but they're, largely they're two similar countries. And so the science can be much more robust because it's based on a larger amount of evidence. And with AI, we know, the larger your data set, the more robust your results, because you're going to get more, you're going to get more atypical results, the bigger your data set. So I think it's important to have 2 or 3 countries participating.
Okay. Anyone else want to add anything?
I would also note that what's been key and different about the tools that we've developed are these tools for evidence-based critical analysis. So large-scale analysis to answer these questions that we have in social science and in policy about what's happening. And moving the shift in responsible AI towards this use of diagnostics to understand the problems that are produced and its linked to larger context.
Thank you very much. I'll hand over to Brent, who might want to select another question to ask.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. We've had a couple of questions about the impact of the current pandemic of COVID-19. It's obviously on everyone's mind. It comes up in every conversation we have. But there's 2 elements to this. Francois's question is more about the impact of this on your particular projects. And some of you have touched on that a little bit. I'd like to hear more. But the other question from Manijas is more about the longer term impact. I mean, how is the pandemic, if it is, affecting the overall trajectory of research around responsible AI? Anyone want to grapple with either the impacts on your own work or on the field more broadly?
To be honest, I want to just add one thing actually on that, because I just I've been through this kind of remote working with the Canadian time. Maybe I referred to that before, but the thing is, because of the arranging for the meetings time were a kind of like the physical ones that we had before the pandemic. Actually, these kind of this time actually was. Now is a kind of a free time for us, or a kind of leisure. This is why actually add a kind of more chance to us to have longer meetings, to have because you don't need to go to a specific place in order to meet this person, or in order to meet your colleague, sorry. So I think this was an actually add-on, on the from the a positive point of view, maybe about the impact of the COVID. These are one of the impacts that I saw that in our research, that we had like when we just actually get along in the whole project with this like huge team that we have, actually it made a very kind of like a very nice and a good impact on the long times that we just spend on the meetings without like looking and when we are going to go home or whatever, or we have other responsibilities. And you know, like even the impact of the COVID, that most of our like shopping became delivery as well. So I think this kind of like one of the like main impacts on our like research. This is one like from an experience that I've been like I've been through. Thank you.
Thanks, Jabir. Others, please just jump in. Don't wait for us to call on you.
So if I can share a slightly sort of less positive perspective, I think for us, it was also a challenging situation because the lead postdoc here in Sheffield has certain disabilities that make it very challenging for her to participate in online meetings. So it was something, it's also the whole isolation and mental health side of it, because she lives by herself in a very small place, which is not well equipped for working from home, and she doesn't have the support of her family in the city. And without access to the office, especially during the first lockdown, over the months, things built up to a really difficult situation. Thankfully, she was allowed finally to start going into the office even now, despite the fact that the UK is in lockdown, and that made a huge positive difference. The online meetings are still a problem to a degree, but we have also found new protocols that make it a little bit easier for her to be involved and contribute in the right ways. Still, it's not as efficient and as effective as we'd like it to be. There's no doubt about that. The other aspect, of course, is that the meeting times that work, as I said, are 5 to 6:30 p.m. UK, and for people with children, this is prime time when you have the kids at home and there's no after-school clubs and you cannot send them to their friends for a play date. So there's been also those other aspects as well. So I think it's a mixed bag. I would definitely think that things would have gone smoother and faster had we not had the pandemic, but at least we're all safe. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo Kalina's point. Jabir, maybe he's single now, so he doesn't know much about this family thing. Actually, it's kind of a big deal for us. Like Kalina said, sometimes, for example, my collaborator in the UK, and when the meeting time actually is the dinner time, and it's a big issue for him, and because he need to take care of kids, and for me, I have 2 kids. I need to take care of them, and my wife also doing academic. Sometimes we have to, even teaching during this time, both kids at home, we need teaching at different days, take turn to take care of kids. Like Kalina said, I would expect things can go smoother, maybe faster without this COVID-19. That's one thing. The other thing I want to touch a little bit about the challenge in this COVID-19 for our project and also our opportunity. We actually, Monideepa and also Nicole, Jabir, we all talk about the COVID-19. We think that might be a changing point before and during is COVID-19. So we actually develop new side project maybe to look at this bias and before this COVID-19 and during this COVID-19. We expect there might be a jumping point. So that's probably a challenging and also a sort of good thing. Yeah.
And along those lines, okay, I don't even have plants. I don't have pets. The most we do is like, I have a sweetie and we keep each other alive and that's it. And so COVID-19, in terms of the work that we're doing, has also been an opportunity to analyze a new data set because there's been a lot of abusive language around COVID-19. So we've been using this thing that we're involved in as well as an opportunity to think through where we're engaged. But I would say it's been hard because I have a very large institute, and all the issues that Kalina and Linglong have brought up have been crucial because you're now trying to work around all these different obligations.
Thank you. Okay. So if I go, Miranda's got a very, very interesting question, which kind of goes back to a point that Wendy made, which I thought was very insightful about interdisciplinary collaborations. And sometimes the reason they're problematic is the social science isn't very good. And one of the problems that we've had, we really struggle to support interdisciplinary research. And we find that when we fund interdisciplinary proposals, what comes out the other end is often discipline-based stuff. And the worst of all possible worlds is that you will have a lab and they will employ the unemployable postdoc to do the interdisciplinary stuff, and that poor person then gets a career-limiting postdoc experience, and we really fail to do it. So they tick the box on the form, but never actually get it to work. So Miranda's got a really interesting question here about, could you share your opinions on how to encourage and set up more of these interdisciplinary research collaborations? So Wendy, you're nodding away there. Can I ask you to come in?
Sure. So I'm going to start with a concrete example. A technology company that won't be named, but that everybody uses, has set up something called This Company and the Humanities and the Future of the Humanities. And what they did was bring together their researchers in their company, as well as leading researchers at various universities that are working on issues of democratic dialogue, moderation, ethics, artificial intelligence, et cetera, and set up a couple of days just for dialogue. And so there were various panels, and each person was, they took one person from the company, one person from academia, they talked together, then they invited another group, and what it has unfolded is a series of conversations. And I have no idea where this will go, but I think this is a model. Mellon as well has started a interdisciplinary grant to look at ways in which the humanities and social sciences and STEM speak to each other in terms of education. And so I think that having more informal meetings, but not kind of like we want interdisciplinary work to happen, come in, but this is a problem. And we know, or this is something that we know that we're working on and that we know that we need more perspectives on. Come and tell us how you're looking at it right now, and tell us what you can't do. Tell us right now what your roadblock is, because your roadblock is usually the starting point for another discipline. But if we don't have these conversations, then we just stop at different places.
Thank you very much. I mean, your point about firms trying to get this to work, I mean, I do really see a big difference as a funder between the huge demand for interdisciplinary capabilities from industry and the way in which the university system really struggles to produce it. I mean, we're very good at getting people from different disciplines to write a proposal together, but to do that interdisciplinary work, why do you think it is that industry is so interested in this work?
I think it's because, again, they're being regulated now as media companies. People are realizing increasingly that tech can't hide under just being a technology company, that they are affecting everyday life, and they want to be responsible. They want to know what that means. And I think that, again, that this is a real opportunity for academia because we have this expertise and we've been thinking about this, to do something that isn't just beholden to industry, even as it supports industry. Because we can do things that they can't do. But again, industry also has its think tank part, right? So there's Microsoft Research, there's other portions of industry that have established places for this kind of dialogue to happen and projects to unfold. And those are mainly based in the US. There is, of course, some in Canada, as well as the UK, but I think this is a great opportunity for government agencies to make this happen.
Fantastic. Does anyone else want to come in on this
can
question?
Can I just jump in here for a minute? I think that one of the best ways to get this interdisciplinary thing going is your impact pathways that ESRC and EPSRC ask us to right now. And if we can work the impact into the proposal, that forces us to be interdisciplinary, because real life problems do not exist in silos. And so a conscious understanding of this is how we go from our research to some real world stakeholder, whether it's a company, whether it's the government, or whether it's just NGOs, forces us to think out within our discipline, of course, but also outside our disciplines. The second point I want to make is interdisciplinary research is not easy. And I did not have the guts to start doing it till I got my tenure. And even then people said I was being stupid and crazy. So it's very, very hard to expect an early career researcher to say, hey, I'm doing interdisciplinary work, because you don't get tenure in interdisciplinary stuff. You get tenure in your discipline. And that's true every single place in the world, in every single university in the world. And companies don't have to deal with that because they're not having people in specific disciplines getting tenure. And even then, as Wendy said, unless you regulate them, they're not going to think beyond their technology anyway, right? The only reason that Uber thinks it's not a technology company is because it's facing all these lawsuits from other taxi companies and things like that. But to come back to our academic thing, I feel like one of the ways that I have seen working, and I think this is partly true of our project as well, the senior leadership of the project is in a comfortable space, in the sense that we are not working for tenure at the moment. We've crossed that. We've had some experience in disciplines outside our domain, which has given us a little bit of an overview of things so that we can see outside the discipline. It is not reasonable to expect that from early career researchers. In that case, if we have, for example, in our project, what we try to do is, if we have early career researchers, we encourage them to work in their disciplines. We cannot expect a computer scientist to look at sociology, especially if they've just finished their PhD, and vice versa. That should fall to the more senior people in the project who can see the big picture. And so while we always keep the big picture in mind, the three silos that I showed at the beginning, the two greens and the blue in the middle, that is for us to understand that, hey, we are disciplinary people first and foremost. And then if we have the big picture in mind, we can say, okay, we target some of, so in terms of publications also, we have targeted in our project, both disciplinary publications as well as interdisciplinary publications. We're not saying we only go for interdisciplinary, because that doesn't help some of our junior colleagues.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, that's a very, very insightful, I think probably final comment. So I would just like to, on behalf of ESRC and UKRI, thank everyone who's been involved in this session. It's been a hugely informative session, and it's been a fantastic collaboration, which I will hope will continue. And thank you to the organisers, thank you to all the people behind the scenes who have made this possible, and thank you to the people in the audience for your fantastic questions. I'll hand over for the final comments to Brent.
Let me just echo Paul's comments. First of all, Paul, it's always a pleasure to work with our colleagues at UKRI, and this is another great example of that collaboration. To the panelists, that was a tremendously rich discussion. Thank you for being concise and thoughtful and engaging in your comments. Thanks to the audience, again, for your comments and your engagement in this session. I just want to reiterate, there will be a survey sent out to participants. Please help the conference organizers by filling out that survey as well. And enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.